everyone. I'm Chef Julia Dunaway, and I make plant-based food that I really enjoy. And today I'm going to be making some plant-based peanut butter bars with chocolate topping. I don't really know a better name for them, but I made some and posted a picture, and everybody said, "Oh, I need to know how to make that." But it was just kind of a thrown together thing where I had not really thought much about it. I had taken my oatmeal cookie recipe out of my breakfast ebook or breakfast cookbook, and I had made like a crust with oatmeal cookie dough, and then I took some dates and added some maple syrup to the dates to make kind of a sticky nut butter, maple syrup, date syrup layer. And then I just put some of my delicious El Rey chocolate that I get from the Chocolates El Rey in Fredericksburg, Texas. So I melted up some of that, put that on top, and I ended up with this wonderful peanut butter bars. And they kind of reminded me of Reese's peanut butter cups, and I made them when my grandsons came over. So that was the whole purpose. It was like, oh, let's do something fun. Let's make something that reminds you of a kid-friendly thing. They like peanut butter and chocolate. So that's what I have here today. And I have a tray full of the ingredients so you can kind of get an idea of what I'm using. I'm using everything from almond flour. So I've got some almond flour. I've got some oat flour, oat flour is just ground up oatmeal. You can just take rolled oats and just grind them up in your food processor. There's really nothing to that. Typical baking powder, baking soda, salt. You can use date syrup or maple syrup. I'm going to use maple syrup today because these are going to go mainly to my husband, and he likes maple syrup better than date syrup. So I'll make them what he likes because he's going to be doing most of the eating. And then I have some Fix and Fogg peanut butter, crunchy peanut butter. This is a new brand that I bought at the Central Market grocery store that I thought tasted really good. Not all peanut butter tastes great to me, so that was a good one. And then I have my dates, and these are Medjool dates, which you can get either at the bulk section of the grocery store, or I got them from the date people. And the date people will ship out dates to you. They'll have wet pack, which this is a wet pack. They come in these containers, and they pack a bunch of them in like a wax paper thing, and they take up more space because they're still moist. And then they also sell a bulk package of dates, which is more dried dates. So it just depends on when you call them what they have available. I called them the other day, and it turns out right now they're actually selling dates, because there are many times of the year where you can't get them. And this is the date people in California. Just look them up. I'll try to remember to put the link in my show notes. But if I don't, it's called the Date People. And if you look at that up on Google, you'll find their phone number. And the only way you can order is very old school. You call them on the phone. They take your order over the phone. They mail you the box of dates, and then you pay for it after you get it. I know, they must be trusting. So remember that. The best dates I've had have been these Date People dates. I ended up getting a huge amount of them, and they were all in the wet pack. And all they had was a variety pack, and it had all these I've never heard of crazy sounding dates, honey dates, and very kind of exotic dates. And I thought, oh, I'm never going to eat these. Well, I just started using them every day in my smoothies. So I use 2 a day, and then I put them in oatmeal and all kinds of things, and they've just been great. So let's get down to making our peanut butter bars. So what we're going to do is make the crust. And I've already got measured out some things. This is my almond flour, 1.5 cups of almond flour, 1/2 cup of oat flour, already measured out. And then we're just going to make our cookie. It's like a cookie batter. So we're going to add something to make it sweet. And in this case, I'm going to be adding 1/4 cup of maple syrup. And like I said, I've substituted sugar and maple syrup with date syrup a lot lately to try to get away from more refined sugars. And so normally I use a lot more date sugar, but because I'm going to give these to my husband, he loves the taste of maple syrup, and he's not really crazy about date syrup. So I'm going to do the maple syrup. But I use this Date Lady syrup for everything else, and it's just organic dates. And this brand is really good. I buy it, you can tell I use a lot of it. This is 48 ounces, and I use it every day in my tea. So that sounds kind of strange, but it tastes really good in tea for some reason. Okay, so 1/4 of a cup of maple syrup. And then I'm going to put 1/4 of a cup of peanut butter. Remember, I showed you my peanut butter. It's just this Fix and Fogg brand, which I had never found before until recently. And I went to my regular grocery store, and they just had it out there. And I thought, well, I'll try it. It didn't look like it had a lot of standing oil in it, because I look at the jar sometimes, and I just kind of hold the jar up and look at it. And some of them, it's like they have a big pool of oil on the top. And to me, that's kind of a turnoff. So I'll see that and I'll think, nah, I don't want that. So this one, I picked up the jar and it didn't have that giant puddle of oil. So I thought, okay, well, give this one a try. Okay, so you have other options. Let's say you're not a big peanut butter fan. You can use any kind of nut butter in this crust. But remember, this is a peanut butter bar. So why not have peanut butter going all the way through it? I kind of think that's, something I would want. So I'm trying to mix up the the peanut butter and the maple syrup. And then I'm also going to add my teaspoon of baking powder. I know in a lot of recipes you can add the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients and mix them together, but this one, it didn't seem to really make a difference. So I'm just trying to throw everything in one bowl, make it easier, less cleanup. 1 teaspoon, and I'm kind of spreading it out, of my baking powder. 1/4 of a teaspoon of baking soda. 1/4 of a teaspoon from over here. And then we can put in another 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. I have kosher salt here. And the funny thing is, when I made this, my grandsons didn't really like it that much. So I made it for them, and they tasted it. It was this crust, the date layer, and then my dark chocolate, 70% dark chocolate topping. And they were kind of like, they ate it, politely ate a bite or two. They ate up one and they said, oh, this is good. But I could tell, you know how you can tell when people don't really like something. I'm using some almond milk. I need about a tablespoon. I might put a little more in. We'll see how dry this is. But I could just tell they weren't crazy about it by the way they looked. So I said, you don't really like this, do you? And they're 6 and 8, they're not that big. And they kind of looked at me and they said, no, not really, Grandma. I said, okay. Well, it's probably because it wasn't sweet enough to them, because they're kids. They like, they're used to eating things like processed American food. So to them, that didn't really taste like the peanut butter bar that they're used to, or Reese's Cup or whatever. So I didn't send it home with them. I just kept the rest of them here. And then after they left, my husband was here. And I said, hey, look, I have all these peanut butter bars I made for the boys, and they didn't really like them very much. So I just kept them here. And so my husband, he says, oh, these are great. I love these. So there you go. He was a fan. All right, so now I have my prepared 8x8 pan that I cut 2 pieces of parchment paper. This is one of these non-stick USA pans, 8x8. And it doesn't really require parchment paper if you bake in it, but I'm going to put it in there anyway. And the reason for that is because when I want to pull this out to cut it, it's a lot easier to do when I just lift it out than to try to hope that it doesn't crumble apart when I try to move it out, which is what, you kind of have to hope for. You'd say, well, oh, maybe it's not going to fall apart when I take it out, and then it does, and then your thing is crumbled. Okay, so it's kind of sticking to my hands. So I'm going to do this impromptu I'm going to get a little pile of oat flour here. This didn't happen to me before, so my batter might be a little wetter than my last one, but it doesn't matter. So if your hands start sticking to stuff, that's what you have flour for. So you just kind of put some flour on your hands, then they don't stick. Because I'm trying to press this down pretty thin, so I really need to get my hands in it. There's no tool that works all that great to place batter in the bottom of a container. So now I'm still looking for a recipe that the grandsons will like, that, you know, I can cook with them. They do like ginger molasses cookies. So during the holidays, I made my plant-based ginger molasses cookies, and there is a YouTube video on that, and they'll eat those all day long. There's something about I guess there's enough molasses in there to make up for the fact that it doesn't have real sugar. So they like that. They like stuff with fruit. So like recently I did a YouTube video on raspberry crisp, and they'll eat stuff like that. You know, the raspberry crisp, apple crisp, anything with fruit, they're a big fan of. Okay, so I got this pretty even, and be sure and get the corners, because if you're just doing the middle and you don't get the corners, when all is said and done, it's going to look a little messy when you try to get a nice even cut and you go around. If you haven't pressed the corners evenly, see, I'm just taking my hand and I'm making sure the edges are nice and tight, because if they're not, that part is going to crumble, and then it's not going to look that good. And I have to take a picture, so I want it to look good for you, right? Okay, so there you go. That's my finished crust. I got it all laid out. It was a little tricky because my hands got sticky, which didn't happen to me before. So the first time I made this, the dough was a little dry, and it kind of crumbled, and it wasn't that great. I'm going to put this in for about, we'll check it at 12 minutes, 350 degree oven. So the first time I made this, it was kind of dry. So then I made another batch yesterday, and I used a modification of my cookie recipe, a little bit different from this one. And that one was too wet. So it was like, that wasn't very good. Now the guy that I gave the cookies to, my friend, my personal trainer, he was more than happy to get the cookies. He thought they were great. But I didn't tell him that they weren't exactly how I wanted them to be. He doesn't know. He's thinking they taste fine to him. So, you know, I do a lot of recipe testing. And the ones I made him yesterday, I had run out of dates. So I had to go to the store and get more Medjool dates. And I ordered some more from the date people yesterday. But I used some other kind of exotic date. And the dates were really too soft. Plug it in my food processor. So the dates were too soft, and so the inside layer was kind of mushy and soft, but it tasted really good, so I didn't tell them. I didn't say, oh, those are not supposed to be like that. Okay, so I've got 10, should be Medjool dates. They start out looking like this or like this, and you have to get the pits out, okay? Do not think that the pits aren't going to matter. And I even kept my pits here, my cutting board, so you could see the pits of the dates. They're big. And there was one time where I mistakenly left one pit in a date. So even if the dates say they're pitted, check them, because I left a pit inside a date and it ruined my whole dish, because the food processor or the blender ground it up. And so at every bite, it was like, there was like a rock at every bite. It was bad. So I wasted a very expensive recipe messing around like that. So don't do what I did. Okay, this calls for 10 pitted dates, 2 tablespoons of maple or date syrup. Remember, I said I'm using maple syrup because I almost dropped that, because of my husband. And then we're going to use another 1/4 of a cup of peanut butter. Because remember, these are peanut butter bars, so got to keep it consistent. If you don't like peanut butter, if you seriously don't want to make peanut butter bars, but you want to make a nut butter chocolate bar, because that sounds good to you, you can always change your recipe up and call it, you know, almond butter bar or sunflower butter bar. And you could take these very same recipe components and just substitute it with almond butter or cashew butter, you know, and just call it nut butter bar. You know, cashew butter would be great. I know there's a lot of recipes where cashew butter is used. And I've made my own. I'm going to put this in here. I've made my own cashew butter before, which is hard to do. You have to process cashew butter for a long time to get it to come out as cashew butter and not just, you know, ground up cashews. So I made cashew butter for a very involved cookie recipe, and it turned out great, but it was very high labor kind of recipe, so I kind of quit doing that one. 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So we're making our layer that's kind of like a date caramel layer. We're not really calling it that, but that's kind of what it reminded me of. A little 1/8 of a teaspoon of salt, which is such a small amount you can barely measure it, but you know, a little tiny bit of kosher salt kind of lifts the dish and gives it a little interesting taste, but you can always leave salt out. I know there are people that are completely salt free and they don't want to put salt in anything, so you know, they just leave it out, and that's okay. All right, I'm going to put a tablespoon of almond milk in there, but you could use any plant milk you like. You could use cashew milk, soy milk, almond milk. You can make your own almond milk, whatever you like. And then all we have to do now is process this until it's smooth. And that does take a little time because those dates are big. So I'm going to turn this on. Pulse it. Maybe we'll pulse it for a time or two. And then we'll turn it on. All right, now I think I can turn it on full swing. Here we go. Let's check it. All right, it's still, even with that amount of time, it's still very chunky. So we got to just let it keep going. It has to be completely smooth. I need to wash my spatula. I'm going to check it again, and I'm going to kind of stir the sides down. Okay, it's making progress, but I can tell that it's still kind of chunky. I'll show you. You can see it's still not very smooth. Now, could I add a little more liquid to it? I could, if I believe that it's too solid. So I think that it might need a tiny drop, not quite a tablespoon, but maybe a 1/2 tablespoon of almond milk. So that's all I'm going to put in, is a 1/2 tablespoon of almond milk, because it seems a little stiff. And of course that has to do with the type of dates you use. If your dates are drier, it could be a little stiff. There, it's moving along better now. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue processing this a little bit longer because it's still a little lumpy, and you get the general idea. I'll process it for another 30 seconds or maybe a minute off camera, and then as soon as the crust is done, I have to let it cool for a few minutes before I put this on. So I'll come back with a cooled crust and this completely smoothed out, and we'll be ready to go on to the next step. and the crust has come out of the oven, and I put it in the freezer for just a few minutes so that it's cool to the touch, because we don't want to have to try to spread something on a hot crust, because then the thing you put on it will melt. And in the meantime, while I'm spreading that on, I'm going to let the rest of my chocolate melt. So what I've done is I've taken my El Rey chocolate and I've set it over a pan of simmering water, not boiling water, just simmering water. It's kind of on a low heat. And I've got most of it melted. I'm going to melt the rest of it. I wanted to just cool it down a little bit by adding some chocolate to it that's not melted. And that'll kind of cool it down. And then we can spread it. So I'll let that melt. Now, my other way of melting chocolate has been to use the microwave. There's nothing wrong with using the microwave oven, but you know, it takes a little bit more of bursts back and forth, and I didn't want to do that on camera because it's kind of tedious. But what you do if you want to melt it in the microwave is you put 1 cup of chocolate, and it should be some kind of a vegan dark chocolate, meaning it doesn't have dairy in it. So the brand that I use, I was telling you earlier, is this El Rey 70%, and it is 100% Venezuelan cacao liquor. It does have cocoa butter, and they do put sugar in. That's why it's 70% and not 100%. For it to be completely sugar-free, it would have to be 100% chocolate. See how nice it melts? 100% chocolate is not very edible. I'm going to turn the heat off of this because it's just going to sit here and melt and melt and melt. So I'm going to take it out from under the water, wipe off the bottom of it, and let it just sit here, not on the burner, and it's going to be fine for spreading. So you want your chocolate to have some sugar in it or it doesn't taste very good. And so the higher the percentage, the less sugar it has. So 85% chocolate is really bitter. 100% chocolate is so bitter that you can't eat it. That's the kind of chocolate, when I was a young home cook, we would get this, I think they were Hershey's or some company's baking chocolate, Baker's baking chocolate, and they were little squares of 100% chocolate. Well, we would use those for brownies. Well, they were so bitter that you had to add 2 cups of sugar to get the brownies sweet enough. So the 70% chocolate, you could eat this as it is. It tastes really good, you know, as just a snack. Of course, we don't want to do that because you could sit here and eat a bowl of these. They taste so delicious. So that's why I use these. A purist who's sugar-free, plant-based, sugar-free, I'm going to start spreading this. You know, a sugar-free, plant-based person who's SOS-free, salt, oil, and sugar-free would say, oh no, we can't use chocolate that has sugar in it. And there are some brands out there that have monk fruit. So they don't have sugar. It's like a, you know, dark chocolate sweetened with monk fruit, no sugar. And it does have a sweet taste. It's like Chalk Zero is what it's called. And I ordered that one time from Amazon, and it was okay, but I could taste the artificial monk fruit taste, which I didn't really care for that. It was not the taste that I liked. So I never bought it again after the first time. I was kind of like, it's all right, but it's just not my thing. Okay, I've got my clean little offset spatula. And so here you can see how that peanut butter layer looks. See how it's not completely smooth because it has chunky peanut butter in it. So you know, it's not going to be 100% smooth because it has, you know, peanut butter with chunks in it. But it's smooth enough. It's perfect. And it, you know, the date part is all smooth. Now, one thing I didn't tell you is if your dates are all dried out, like let's say you have dates that have been in a cupboard for a long time and they're super dry and they're not at all moist, you do have the option, and do consider doing this, is put your dates, your pitted dates, in a bowl of boiling water for 3 minutes. Okay, 3 minutes, and then take them out and get all the liquid out of them because you don't want them to be watery. You just want to soften them up and then drain them extremely well. If you put boiling water over your dates and then don't drain them well, then you're going to be adding a lot of liquid to this layer. And you don't want that, because then this middle layer will ooze out of your bar and it won't taste very good. It'll just be too, I don't know, it just won't be good. It'll be like the one I made yesterday when I tried to cut the bars. The middle layer was real soft because the dates I was using yesterday were too soft. They had a real soft center, not like the Medjool dates. So all these little details do matter, because they will make or break your recipe. You want this middle layer to be this consistency that you see me showing you, where it's really thick, and you have to really kind of work at spreading it. If it gets too moist, then it's not going to spread right. It's just going to be like oozing off of here. It'll be too wet. So you kind of see it's very thick. Now that I've made this, this is my third time, I'm starting to understand more about what can go wrong, because the one I made yesterday did not turn out as planned. All right, so then the last thing that we do, and I will come back and show you cutting this up as well, but for now we have to get the chocolate on here. And then we have to we'll put it in the freezer for just a few minutes and let the chocolate set up before we try to cut it, because as you can see, the chocolate's really soft and we won't be able to cut this into squares with soft chocolate. So I'm going to show you when I get it out of the pan what we have to do to cut it, and hopefully it will work. If it doesn't, we'll have messy squares, but they'll still taste good. It's kind of what happened yesterday. They did not cut very well because the inside was oozing out. So I'm just scraping out every last bit of this chocolate. And then I'm going to spread it. I need my offset spatula again. So anyway, I melted the chocolate on the stove top, just over the simmering water. And that's the way I like to do it, because you have to be careful. If you try to melt your chocolate in the microwave, and it's this high quality chocolate like this, it's easy to burn it, and you can destroy, and this chocolate's not cheap. So I don't like to take the chance to destroy this expensive, beautiful chocolate by nuking it in the microwave and overdoing it. So I don't recommend you use the microwave. If you must, how I would do it is do like a minute on high, and then after that, I do 30-second intervals at 50% power. Okay, so what that does is it still melts it, but it doesn't burn it, because the chocolate will burn if you do it at, like try to rush it and do it, it will burn, okay? And you can lick. See, when my kids were little, I could always count on them to lick the spoons after I made something like that. Okay, so you see what I've got here. I've got the, that needs, I see a little section in the corner where it didn't quite reach, so I'm going to use this measuring spoon and get it in each corner, because I want the corners to look uniform. All right, there we go. Oh, I love that chocolate. And the 70% chocolate does have enough sweetness for me. 80%, it's getting a little too bitter. Okay, so here's our finished thing. Remember, 10 minutes in the freezer. Too much more than that, it'll get too hard to cut. You can also put it in the refrigerator for, you know, an hour or so, 2 hours, because you want everything to be able, where you're able to cut it, okay? And sitting out like this, you're not going to be able to cut it for a long time at room temperature. Eventually, the chocolate will harden and you'll be able to cut it, but it would take a long time. Freezer's really quick, and then we'll get it out and we'll cut it into squares and we'll be good to go. And probably what I'm going to do before I stick it in the freezer is I forgot to get my peanuts. I have some dry roasted peanuts, and I also have some just plain peanuts that have no oil. I'm going to find some of those and just sprinkle the top with some peanuts, because remember, it's supposed to be like a peanut butter cut, but it's peanut butter bars. All right, so when this is ready to cut, I'll come back and show you what the finished bars look like. See you in a few minutes. All right, they've been in the freezer. It was more like 20 minutes, 10 minutes. They were still really melted. But what you want is you want the top to be where you can touch it and it doesn't come off on your finger, so that it's pretty much completely not hard, but not melted either. So that way you can handle it. Oh, I got a little bit of my parchment paper stuck under the edge here. Nobody wants to eat a piece of paper. There we go. So, you know, the reason for that is you just don't want the melted chocolate will make it hard to cut it. So I'm just going to smooth the sides a little bit where some of the peanut butter is kind of messy. I'll just kind of smooth that out of there, and then it'll all look uniform. It's going to be good. Now, instead of using a knife, my technique for cutting this, there's kind of an irregular shard of chocolate here. Don't throw it away, just eat it. Okay, so what I'm going to use to cut this, instead of using a knife, I'll just leave the parchment paper here. It's not going to hurt anything, because I'm going to use my little tool here. And it's kind of like a bench scraper, or it's, you know, one of these tools that you use for gathering up your vegetables. So I'm just going to score it. I'm going to cut it in half. And the reason I've got it in hot water is that way it's not going to crack the top, okay? So I stuck it in this hot water, and I'm going to get a paper towel so I don't get my towel all dirty. And what that allowed me to do, let me get my knife back. What that allowed me to do was cut the top of it, and the chocolate didn't, you know, turn into a bunch of shards of chocolate. I'll show you so you can see, because remember, I've made this a couple of times and had my trial and error phase, but I want you to see that by doing that, see the clean cut that it made? And that's because I used this wet, or this hot, not wet, I dried it off, but this is a hot bench scraper. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut the halves in half, kind of scoring it with the warm bench scraper so that my cut can go through without wrecking the bar, so it has nice even edges. Now, why is this important? It's not, you know, but if you want your things to look worthy of taking to a buffet table somewhere, like you want to take them and give them as a gift, you don't want them to be all cracked on top and all irregular and messed up looking, right? So these are my little tips of how to make things cut nice, because a lot of recipes won't tell you that. They'll just say, you know, cut the bars into pieces, and then you try to do it, and then it makes a big mess. It all kind of starts falling apart, and you're like, well, you know, is that how it's supposed to be? No, it's because you weren't told that it's really hard to cut chocolate once it starts to harden, because the chocolate will start cracking all over the top. So instead of doing that, our chocolate has stayed all in the nice pieces, so we're able to cut it. So now we have to decide what size pieces we're going to have here. We can have giant pieces, we can have, you know, normal size pieces. I think each one would be about 3 pieces, would be about the right size for a serving. So I'm going to cut each of these strips into 3 bars, and that's going to look something like this. I'll put it on the plate so you can see it easier. And see how nice they just come right off the plate? They're all in one piece. They're all intact. You can see the layers. They look good. I know they taste good because I've had them before, and they're irresistible. So, you know, don't think you can make these and not eat them, because that's next to impossible. So my way of dealing with it is I make them and give them away. Or my husband, who has a big sweet tooth, he's always happy to eat my creations. My kids, oh, that one's a little small. That's all right. My kids, if they're home, they'll eat my stuff. Some like it better than others. You know, they're not always the biggest fans of my plant-based versions of things, but I just want you to see how nice that looks. You can see, especially on the edge, you can see the date layer. You can see the nice crust. You can see the chocolate layer. And that's how you want it to look. You want it to look uniform. See, now this little piece that I cut the wrong size, I guess I'll have to eat it later. Maybe that will be my lunch. Maybe not, but that would make a great lunch, wouldn't it? I'm trying to cut around this chunk of peanut. I did put some chopped up Virginia peanuts on here before I put them in the freezer. I just happen to have some because remember, you know, it kind of goes along with the bar. It's a peanut butter bar with chocolate. Can we get this hot water? Well, no, I still need it. Okay, so you get the idea. I don't have to cut all of them for you. That you basically take your time. You don't want to go through all this work. Well, I'll keep doing it while I'm talking. You don't want to go through all this work and then, you know, take your knife and start hacking at your bars and then have a bunch of irregular sized, messed up bars. And I have seen pictures on Google, you know, where people have shown pictures of their so-called peanut butter chocolate bars. Most of them are no-bake creations, and they'll be all like misshapen and weird looking. And I think, okay, well, they just didn't take their time once they got to that part and, you know, arrange them nicely. This one has a little crack in it, so I'm going to replace it with a prettier one for the picture. There we go. And, you know, my husband's more than happy to eat any irregular ones. So well, I think I'll leave them alone. Okay, anyway, you guys get the idea that this is I'll show you a real nice one. The chocolate peanut butter bars with a nice sort of an oat crust, a date layer, and then the really high quality El Rey chocolate. So I'll put the recipe here in the show notes, and feel free to make this, make adjustments to it, use date syrup instead of maple syrup, use whatever chocolate you want to put on the top. If you have another brand of chocolate you like that's low sugar, that tastes good to you, use that. Just make sure it's vegan because all my recipes are plant-based. So there you go. This was the plant-based no oil peanut butter bar with chocolate. And I hope you make this. I hope you enjoy it. I hope your family enjoys it. I sure can't wait to have mine, which I'll sample right now. Wow. I really like my new crust. It's my improved version. It turned out really good. So make this. I don't think I said this, but I ended up cooking the crust for 14 minutes. It took that long for it to be the consistency I wanted. So the crust was 14 minutes at 350 degrees. And then you saw how I made everything else. So there you go. Hope you make this. Subscribe to my channel. I try to do one new video. Do I have chocolate on my face? I try to do one new video every week. And then, you know, a lot of times they're savory. I'm testing different things all the time. And then I try to make a video. So this was tested when my grandsons came over. They didn't like it, but I decided I liked it. So here you go. Hope you make this. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.